On April 5, 1909, the Arizona Gazette published one of the most extraordinary and controversial stories in the history of American archaeology. The headline was bold, almost unbelievable. Explorers had allegedly discovered a vast underground city inside the Grand Canyon, filled with Egyptian artifacts, mummies, oriental statues, and evidence of an advanced civilization that should not exist in the heart of North America. The explorer responsible for the discovery was named G.E. Kincaid, reportedly working under the auspices of the Smithsonian Institution. The cavern he claimed to have found was so immense that it could house 50,000 people, with tunnels stretching for miles, chambers filled with artifacts, and hieroglyphs carved into the walls. But here is the mystery that persists to this day. There are no official records of this expedition. The Smithsonian denies any involvement, and the specific area of the Grand Canyon where the cave was supposedly located is strictly controlled, with restrictions on airspace and ground access. So what really happened in 1909, and why did this story disappear so completely from the official record? Let's start with the original article, because the details are far too specific to be pure fiction. The story was published in the April 5, 1909 edition of the Arizona Gazette, a respected newspaper at the time, not a sensational tabloid. The article claims that G.E. Kincaid, described as an experienced explorer and hunter who had spent 30 years navigating the Colorado and Green Rivers, made the discovery while on an expedition funded by the Smithsonian Institution. According to the report, Kincaid was traveling alone by boat down the Colorado River through the canyon when he noticed stains or markings on the sedimentary rock wall, approximately 2,000 feet above the river level. Intrigued, he managed to climb up to the opening and discovered what he described as an artificial cave, clearly carved by human hands rather than formed by natural processes. The entrance was wide and symmetrical, leading into a network of tunnels and chambers that extended deep into the rock. The article describes Kincaid venturing hundreds of feet inside the cavern and finding chambers filled with astonishing artifacts. There were embalmed mummies prepared with techniques similar to those used in ancient Egypt, statues resembling Buddhist or Eastern deities, copper utensils of a purity far exceeding what would be expected from any pre-Columbian civilization in the Americas, and tablets covered in hieroglyphs that did not correspond to any known writing system of Native American tribes. One chamber was described as a massive crypt containing mummies arranged along the walls. Another appeared to be a ceremonial hall, with an altar at its center and stone idols placed around it. There were even reports of urns containing preserved seeds and grains, sophisticated metal tools, and evidence of advanced ventilation systems that kept air circulating through the deep tunnels. Kincaid claimed to have collected samples and photographs, which were sent to the Smithsonian for analysis. The article mentions a Professor S.A. Jordan, also allegedly from the Smithsonian, who supposedly led a second, larger expedition to the cave to conduct proper excavations. And then, suddenly, total silence. No follow-up articles were published. No official reports were released. No evidence was ever presented to the public. When modern researchers began investigating this story in the 1960s and 1970s, they searched the Smithsonian Institution's archives for any record of G.E. Kincaid, Professor S.A. Jordan, or an expedition to the Grand Canyon in 1909. They found nothing. Zero. The Smithsonian categorically denies that any such expedition ever occurred, that these men ever worked for the institution, or that any Egyptian artifacts were ever discovered in the Grand Canyon. But this is where the story becomes strange. If you examine a topographic map of the Grand Canyon, you will notice something peculiar. Dozens of geological formations in the area bear Egyptian and Eastern names: Tower of Ra, Isis Temple, Buddha Temple, Cheops Pyramid, Osiris Temple, Tower of Set, Horus Temple. The list goes on, with more than 30 formations named after Egyptian, Hindu, and Buddhist deities and concepts. Why would rock formations in Arizona carry Egyptian names? The official explanation is that these names were assigned by Clarence Dutton, a geologist who mapped the Grand Canyon in the 1880s. Dutton was fascinated by ancient mythology and chose grandiose names to reflect the canyon's majestic scale. A reasonable explanation, except for one detail. Many of these names were given specifically to formations near the area where Kincaid's cave was allegedly located. And there's more. There is a specific zone within the Grand Canyon, precisely in the area where the coordinates described in the 1909 article suggest the cave would be located, that is subject to strict restrictions. Unauthorized aircraft are not permitted to fly over it. Ground access is tightly controlled and requires special permits from the National Park Service. Officially, these restrictions exist to protect sensitive Native American archaeological sites and endangered wildlife habitats. But why is this particular area so rigorously controlled when other parts of the canyon are relatively accessible? Some researchers have attempted independent expeditions to locate the cave entrance. The 1909 article states that the cave was located on the north wall of the canyon, approximately 42 miles upstream from the confluence with the Little Colorado River. Using these approximate coordinates, modern explorers have identified potential locations, only to find access blocked or to be stopped by authorities before they could continue their search. One of the most intriguing aspects of this story is that it does not exist in isolation. There are other legends and oral traditions from native peoples of the region that speak of ancient cities and prior races that inhabited the canyon long before the Hopi, Navajo, or Zuni. The Hopi have oral traditions about the Sipapuni, the sacred place from which their ancestors emerged from the underworld to the surface of the earth. According to some interpretations, this place is located within the Grand Canyon in a deep cave leading to tunnels and underground chambers. The Paiute, another tribe from the region, tell legends of red-haired giants who lived in caves and fought against their ancestors. They call these beings the Siteka and claim they were eventually hunted down and exterminated, but that their caves and remnants of their civilization still exist in the mountains and canyons of Nevada and Arizona. There are also reports from explorers predating Kincaid. John Wesley Powell, the famous explorer who led the first documented descent of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon in 1869, mentioned the existence of ruins and ancient structures along the canyon in his journals. Some of these ruins were attributed to ancestral Puebloan cultures, but Powell described at least one structure as being of a scale and sophistication beyond what would be expected from the native tribes of the region. Returning to the 1909 article, several details deserve closer attention. The description of the mummies is particularly interesting. The article states that they were seated in lotus positions, not laid out as would be typical in Egyptian burial practices. This suggests Eastern, perhaps Buddhist, influences. The statues were also described as having Asian characteristics, with serene faces and meditative postures. This raises the possibility that if the cave truly existed, it was not strictly Egyptian, but rather the product of an Eastern civilization or a hybrid culture with knowledge of both Egyptian and Asian traditions. The presence of high-purity copper is another revealing detail. Native American cultures did use copper, particularly in the Great Lakes region, but the copper described in the article was of exceptionally high quality. Additionally, there were reports of tools made from metal alloys that local tribes should not have possessed the knowledge to produce. If these descriptions are accurate, they suggest contact with civilizations possessing advanced metallurgical skills. At this point, there are two primary possibilities. The first is that the entire story was an elaborate hoax, perhaps invented by the newspaper to sell copies, or by a con artist seeking notoriety. Newspapers of that era occasionally published sensational stories without rigorous fact-checking, especially in frontier regions where news traveled slowly and verification was difficult. But if it was a hoax, it was extraordinarily well constructed. The article contains specific details, geographic coordinates, named individuals, technical descriptions of artifacts and structures. This is not the kind of story one invents casually. Someone would have needed considerable knowledge of archaeology, geology, and Native American traditions to create such a coherent narrative. The second possibility is that the discovery truly occurred but was deliberately suppressed. Why would it be suppressed? Because it did not fit the accepted historical narrative. In 1909, the dominant academic view held that the Americas were populated relatively late in human history by peoples migrating from Asia via the Bering Strait. The idea that Egyptian or Asian civilizations could have crossed oceans and established colonies or cities in the Americas thousands of years before Columbus was considered absurd. Preserving that narrative was important, not only academically, but politically. The history of the Americas was being written in a way that justified European colonization and the subjugation of native peoples. Admitting that advanced civilizations existed in the Americas long before Europeans arrived, perhaps even civilizations connected to the Old World, would complicate that narrative in deeply uncomfortable ways. The Smithsonian Institution in particular has long been accused of suppressing discoveries that do not align with the official historical framework. We have already discussed reports of giant skeletons that allegedly vanished into Smithsonian archives. If there is a pattern of suppression, then the Grand Canyon cave would simply be another example. There is also a practical consideration. If a cave of such size, filled with artifacts, truly exists, properly excavating and studying it would be a massive undertaking, requiring years of work, substantial funding, and large teams of specialists. Perhaps authorities decided it was easier to seal the cave and restrict the area than to deal with the implications of such a disruptive discovery. Or perhaps there is something more. Some theorists suggest the cave may contain information or artifacts considered dangerous or destabilizing, perhaps texts that contradict foundational religious or historical assumptions, perhaps technology we do not fully understand, perhaps evidence of transoceanic contact that would force a radical rewriting of human history. More extreme theories connect the site to lost civilizations such as Atlantis or Lemuria, hypothetical continents said to have sunk beneath the oceans millennia ago. According to these theories, refugees from these civilizations spread across the world, establishing colonies and preserving their knowledge in remote locations. The Grand Canyon, with its inaccessible depths and labyrinthine geography, would be an ideal place to hide such a city or repository of knowledge. What we know for certain is limited. We know the article exists and was published in a legitimate newspaper. We know the described area has unusual access restrictions. We know the surrounding formations bear Egyptian and Eastern names, explained in ways that feel almost too convenient. And we know the Smithsonian denies all knowledge of the expedition, without offering a clear explanation for why such a detailed and specific story would be published without basis. The Grand Canyon holds secrets. This much is undeniable. With its billions of years of geological history exposed in layered rock, its unexplored caves, and its side canyons stretching for miles without easy access, it is entirely possible that significant archaeological discoveries remain hidden within its depths. Whether Kincaid's cave is one of them, or merely a captivating legend that captured the public imagination, we may never know for certain. But the question remains, why hide it? If there is nothing there, why the restrictions? Why the absolute denial without public investigation? The truth, whatever it may be, lies buried beneath layers of time, secrecy, and perhaps fear of what might be revealed if we dig too deeply into the stories that do not fit neatly into what we have been taught.